Well, good morning. This is a video where your old professor is supposed to introduce himself and tell you a little bit about where I've been and what I'm doing. As you can tell by my gray hair, I'm no spring chicken. I've got a lot of interest. My life is pretty well revolved around motorcycles, muscle cars, boats, aviation, and I was raised in a very conservative family. But I had a very flamboyant uncle, which I practically adored, and spent most of my time growing up with him. He happened to be an own an aircraft dealership, so all these things that I hold dear were pretty much things that I learned from him. Being in the aircraft business, I learned to love airplanes. So most of my youth was spent washing airplanes and airing up tires and scrubbing hangar floors and doing anything I could to get an airplane ride. Got a check ride and got my license when I was 17 and been flying just about ever since. Not anything big, little airplanes mostly, at least until middle life. I'm semi-retired now. I taught at Rogers State University for 23 years and taught mostly online and traditional courses in class. And for the most part, taught political science courses and American history courses. I am now, I guess you'd say, retired, semi-retired, whatever. For the last 5 years, I've been living on Lake Texoma with my wife and various toys. And we live in kind of a unique area on Lake Texoma. We have water at both ends of the road out here in front of our house, a marina at one end, beautiful beach at the other end, and 2,500 acres across the street that I can walk over and kill stuff anytime I feel like it, which is not very frequent. To begin my careers, I should say, I was fortunate enough that while I was still in high school, I heard about an intern program at IBM and volunteered for it. And the day I got out, I graduated from high school, I started as an intern with IBM. And 13 years later, I finally left them. Wonderful career, great company back in those days. They promoted me and gave me raises and stuff as time went on. They moved me to Atlanta, Georgia. I was born and raised in Abilene, Texas, and so they sent me to Atlanta, which was a culture shock, and then to Dallas, and then to Nashville, Tennessee, and then eventually I wound up in a regional office in Tulsa, Oklahoma. After I left the IBM Corporation, I started some little companies of my own. A little company called Continental Computer Corporation, and another little computer-oriented company called Mid-America Products. And after about 5 years of doing that, shockingly, one afternoon, one of my customers walked in the door and said, "I want to buy you out." And I hadn't even thought about it, but anyway, he said, "How much?" And this had to be Atlantic Richfield out of Dallas, Texas, actually Plano. But anyway, I turned around and wrote a number on the wall and said, "For that number, you can have everything but my philodendron there on the corner, in the corner of the office, and my gun collection." And surprisingly, he said, "I'll be back in an hour with a cashier's check." So an hour later, I'm unemployed. First time in my life. Had a check, but I was still without a job. Through some of my company dealings, I had become interested in speech and hearing handicap organizations and people. And so for nearly 2 years, I traveled around the country at my own expense and gave fundraising speeches to Lions Clubs, Sertomas, Optimists, anybody who'd listen to me, and anybody who might give me a check for my passion, which was raising money for helping people with speech and hearing handicaps. And it was in the process of giving one of those talks one day in Wichita, Kansas, that my life took another turn. A gentleman happened to be in the office, I should say be in attendance, where I was giving a fundraising speech to the Lions Club in downtown Wichita. And afterwards, he asked me what I did for a living. I said, basically, I'm a bum. I just travel around the corner and do this. He said, well, why don't you come back to Wichita tomorrow and meet with me and a few of the fellows at the company I work for. Well, it turned out he was the president of Cessna Citation, the part of Cessna Aircraft that makes and sells Falcon jets. And I did come back the next day, and by 6 o'clock the next afternoon, I was a marketing rep for jet aircraft. And so for about 2 years, 2.5 years, I went around the country demonstrating and flying and selling Cessna Citation aircraft, corporate jet. They run from 6 passenger to about 12 passenger, and the main price for a new one is somewhere between $6 and $14, $15 million. Anyway, great experience. Got to use some of my aviation background and my passion. And one day I'm staying on the ramp in Dayton, Ohio at a what we call an NBAA convention, a National Business Aircraft Association meeting. Actually, it's a big get-together where people come from all over the world to look at the latest jets from the various companies who builds them. And I was representing my company, and a fellow who I'd met a couple of times before walked up and said, why you want to sell a piece of junk like this when you can sell the greatest airplane in the world? I said, for how much? And he said, well, more than you make it now. And literally 2 weeks later, I was in Paris, France, working for Aviance Marcel Dassault, a giant corporation in France that also happens to make a very fine elite line of corporate jet aircraft. They also make a lot of stuff to kill people. They make the Mirage fighter plane, the F-1, and a few others. They make the Edendard bomber and the Super Edendard, which is a sophisticated medium-weight bomber. They also make missiles, the Exorcist, and a few other different kinds of missiles that are smart weapons. But they hired me to sell the Falcons in the Western Hemisphere, along with 8 other guys. And so it was a traveling job. Again, pretty much lived out of a suitcase for 30 years. But it was a nice company, and I enjoyed it. I was there for about 5 years. And they also had a regional office in Little Rock, Arkansas, of all places, where the airplanes that were being delivered in the Western Hemisphere had their interiors placed in them, and the avionics, and also the final paint scheme was added in Little Rock, of all places. So they had corporate housing there, so I spent a lot of time in Little Rock. It's kind of my home base for whenever I was calling on people in the United States. I've been flying a little Cessna Chickahawk in 172, but that was a competitor to Falcon, so I had to sell it. And I bought a Mooney, which I love dearly and still fly around in. Mooney's a lot more performance-oriented. It's a sophisticated airplane with a constant speed prop and retractable gear and all that sort of thing. Well, at some point I decided I got tired of living out of a suitcase, so I quit. I'm unemployed again. And this time I said, I think I'll become a lawyer. The only problem is I didn't have any education, any higher education to speak of. A handful of courses I'd taken right out of college, along with being an IBM intern. But I had to start basically at ground zero, and I'm in the mid-40s by this time. So that's what I did. I started working on undergraduate work. Got a bachelor's degree at Oklahoma State University, and kept on going. Went to University of Tulsa, got a master's degree. And then I went back to OU and started working, went back to OSU at this time and started working on a doctorate. And somewhere around there, toward the end of getting my master's at TU, I got a call from Rogers State University. And it so happened that one of the department chairs, who had been with RSU for a while, happened to know a department head at the University of Tulsa, and they were looking for somebody in the history poli-sci department. And my name came up. And again, about 2 weeks later, I'm now working for Rogers State University, where I spent most of my years. I taught courses in the classroom. I also taught live interactive TV courses. And I started teaching online courses before there was much online. There was no internet. There was no learning management systems like we have today. You had a glorified correspondence course that you facilitated with email, basically. But nevertheless, they put Rogers in a very good position to be one of the pioneers of online distance education. So after I retired, Rogers State was gracious enough to allow me to go ahead and teach online courses. So ever since I retired from teaching in the classroom, I teach online courses from the lake out here at Lake Texoma, and love it very much. Again, you're in a course that I have taught for more than 20 years, both in the class and out of the class. And I guess you would say that my whole life has really been about teaching, marketing, whether it's large-scale items, capital asset equipment, jet airplanes, computers. It's not a whole lot different from teaching. You're educating people. You're educating them that your product is as good or better than anything else they could get on the market. You're educating them how it works, how it'll save them money. It'll go faster and farther than anything else. And when I found myself in the classroom, selling ideas, selling concepts, selling history, selling the way the government works, I found it to not be all that different. You prepare for it in much the same way. You make your presentations. You use whatever tools that you can gather around you, and you go out and you tell your story. So while I've never planned much of my entire life, just kind of stand on the street corner and wait on something to happen. On the other hand, being at least partially prepared for whatever the future holds has always saved my bacon. And I've gone from one marvelous career to the next and had a marvelous life and enjoyed every minute while I was doing it. In conclusion, you can do anything you want to do. And I'm living proof that if I can do it, if I can have a reasonably decent life and accomplish a few things, have a nice family, raise some fantastic kids, if I can do it, you can do it. Anybody can do it. And if I can start the school from scratch in my mid-40s, by all means, anybody can do it. I've never considered myself extremely smart. I have been a hard worker, but I work at everything I do. I have to work to learn stuff. I bet you do too. Anyway, that's who I am. I'm looking forward to the course. Can't wait to get started. And I'm at your disposal. It closes your nearest computer with email. So let's have a great semester, and I look forward to hearing from you. Bye-bye.